Hello! I hope you're doing well today. I really enjoyed reading your discussions on your derivation reflections, and I thought there was a lot of wisdom in those discussions already about approaches to take to solving derivations and ways to come up with actually produce the derivations. And I wanted to put that all together in one place so that everyone could see all the different parts of it. So that's what I'm going to do in this brief video. So one issue that a bunch of people mentioned was that they sometimes find themselves overthinking. And overthinking, I think you know what it is. It's when you get sort of really caught up in, oh, what's the problem? And it doesn't help very much. And basically what's happening when you're overthinking is you're trying to think about too much at once. And it's trying to it's thinking that maybe the thing I need to see next to do the problem is this really big complicated thing. And maybe it's even thinking, oh, I need to understand how the whole derivation is going to work from the beginning to the end, and I need to know what all the different pieces are along the way. Or there's some really complicated rule application I'm going to need to make. But actually, you don't need to see how the whole derivation is going to play out at once, and the rule applications are not complicated. Sometimes you have to look at them from the right light, like with that modus tollens problem where the consequent was a negation of a conditional, so you needed a double negation of the conditional for MT. So that was kind of tricky, but it wasn't complicated. You just had to look at it in the right light. So when we think it's like a really complicated thing we have to hold in our heads all at once, that's when things get challenging. And you don't have to do that. It's enough to think, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the next step in this derivation. That's all I need to do right now. It's just one step. And then I'll find that, and then I'm just going to keep walking around. I'm going to be experimenting and see, well, where do I go if I do this, and then this, and then this, or this, and then that, and then that, and see what happens. And if you know what it's like when you'll get home, then you'll get there eventually, and then you'll be home. So you do not need to have the whole derivation figured out in advance. And indeed, in many cases, you won't be able to have the whole derivation figured out in advance. The way you're going to figure it out is by actually experimenting and trying different stuff and seeing what works and what doesn't. And only then will you know. In that way, strangely enough, this is really a creative endeavor where you're discovering something in cooking up the derivation. You're discovering what works and what doesn't. It seems like, oh, this is logic and it should all be cut and dry, and in a certain way it is, but you have to find the materials to which to apply the logical rules. And that's really a creative endeavor. And you don't know how it's going to work out at the beginning. You have to go and experiment and see. So next thing is, some people were worried about, oh, maybe if I make this rule application, then I won't be able to complete the derivation. Right now, we don't need to worry about that. Right now, it's not possible for you to ruin a derivation. You might add a line that's unnecessary, and then the derivation might be a little bit more complicated and confusing than it otherwise needs to be, but you'll never do something that will stop you from completing the derivation, because you never make any of the lines go away, right? You can use a line as much as you want, so you're never going to ruin a derivation. So you don't need to worry about that. You can try it, and it might not work, and it might not be helpful, and it might even make the derivation longer than it needs to be and confusing, and those are all not fantastic. But you're never going to ruin the derivation. You're never going to just like, oh, I did this and therefore I cannot complete the derivation. So no, I'll just go back to, I'll go back to the other lines and use them. And you don't even need to delete the unnecessary line. All you can do right now is, the worst you can do is produce unnecessary lines. That's it. Okay. Another thing that people talked about were rules. So the rules are our tools, and so there are only tools, and so we need to know really when do they apply. It also helps to know what they produce, but we absolutely need to know when do they apply. And that's part of the reason why we have assignments twice a week, is because if we had one big assignment that was due once a week, then it'd be a huge amount to do all at once, and then also we'd be forgetting our rules. And it's because we work on them regularly that we learn them and remember them. So it's helpful to review what the rules are before you even start the derivations to get them sort of loaded in your mind, and so you make sure you remember all of them and you don't forget any of them at the start. And then it's helpful to have your rules sheet handy so you can look at it and say, oh, I'm stuck, let me review what all the rules are and make sure I remember all of them, because maybe I was forgetting one that might be relevant. A lot of what is involved in solving a derivation is really just sort of pointing your brain in the right direction and making your brain look at the right part of the problem. And then it goes, oh, I see what to do, and it clicks. So the rule sheet helps to do that because it says, okay, brain, these are the things I want you to pay attention for, brain. I want you to pay attention for these opportunities. And then you point your brain at the problem, and you see the answer. Maybe not always right away, right? We know that, but eventually. So it helps also to have some sense of what our strategy is. So I really recommend using the strategy handouts. Now that we're with conditional derivations, we really have a 5-part strategy. And those strategies will work for every single derivation that we're going to do. They're not just kind of like, oh, if you try this, it might work, and probably it'll work. No, they will work for every derivation. So I really strongly recommend using those. And they ask you to do it really just one step at a time. It's like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do this. And I'm going to trust that in doing all of those things, I'm eventually going to get to the end. And you will. So you do need to know what questions to ask, and it's really about finding the main questions to ask are, what do I need to box and cancel? Where can I find MP and MT applications? And those are the main things right now that we really need to be asking about. Most of the other stuff is pretty obvious once it's framed in terms of those questions. But asking those questions, that can sometimes be tricky. We forget to do that, or it's not obvious what the answer is. And that's where you really want to be focused. And it's also helpful to experiment. Sometimes experiments don't work and they lead off in the wrong direction and they don't get us anywhere. But that's actually, even that is helpful information because we learned, okay, well, of the sort of different things I might try, that one's not working. Let me try something else. Or of the different things I might try, that one certainly doesn't seem like it's working. Let me try something else. And then, of course, you do need to know when you're done. So you need to know, be able to tell whether or not you're done. So what do I need for CD, or what do I need for DD now? Good. But you don't need to chart the whole derivation out all at once and how it's going to get you to where you're going to be done. You just need to be able to recognize, oh, I've made it. I'm now in a position where I can box and cancel. And so you do not need to see the whole thing. Lastly, taking breaks is really good. Why? Well, so our unconscious mind is in a lot of ways much more powerful than our conscious mind. And our unconscious mind, when it looks at a problem and it sort of tries to figure out the problem and it can't quite get it, but then you sort of, if you go away, your unconscious mind its gears will turn away on the problem. And so when you come back, you might look at it and just click, you get it. So I really recommend, if you're having trouble with the problem, to take a break and to say, okay, let me put that away and then I'll come back to it. Some people mentioned, that this feels like learning a foreign language. And in fact, I would say it is learning a foreign language. We know Spanish and English and Mandarin or whatever languages you happen to know. And this is another language. It's not English, it's not Spanish, it's not Mandarin, it's not anything else. It's its own distinct language. And you really are learning both how to translate between it and English and how it works on its own. And just as you rely on your unconscious mind to speak English and Spanish and all the other languages you might know, or any other languages you might know, so the same thing with this. You learn the rules, and that filters into your unconscious mind, and then your unconscious mind is able to see stuff. But so you really want to give your unconscious mind all the help it can get, and take it easy on our conscious mind. Also, I recommend going back to notes and videos when you're stuck. A lot of people talk about that and find that really helpful. And then lastly, you can always post on the discussion board and I will give you some feedback. You might not like the feedback I give you because probably what I'm going to do is ask you some questions. But I'm asking you the questions that I would like you to ask yourself, and if you figure out the answers to those questions, then the next step in the problem will become apparent. It'll be obvious what to do. You might have trouble figuring out those questions, or figuring out how to answer the questions I've asked, and that's fine, then post and say that. But if you post on the discussion board, I'll ask you a question to point you in the right direction, and if that's not working enough, then just post and say, no, I need more help, give me more help, and I'll be happy to do that. So I hope these are helpful. I certainly, all this stuff is stuff that people, individual students say is helpful, and I would agree. It's what I have seen over years of of doing this. So I hope you find these suggestions helpful and try implementing them if there's anything that seems like it would be worthwhile. I really recommend not trying to overthink and not trying to do too much at once, and really try to make it easy on yourself as much as you can.